echoes of the crime.
On a quiet Thursday afternoon in Boston, Massachusetts, St. Mary's Hospital, long regarded as a sanctuary of healing, transformed into the scene of a nightmare. How could a place meant to save lives conceal a death? That question haunted the community as news spread. A patient had died, and her body was discovered, hidden in a dark corner of a storage closet, a place no one would think to look. It was June 12, 2025, and the atmosphere at St. Mary's was business as usual. Nurses bustled through gleaming hallways, pushing carts of medical supplies while the steady hum of machines filled the emergency ward. The sharp scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. Located in the vibrant Dorchester neighborhood, the hospital had been a beacon of hope for the community for decades. But at 3:47 p.m. that day, a janitor named Maria Gonzalez opened the door to a storage closet in the basement. What she saw made her scream. Dropping her bucket of cleaning water, a body hastily covered with a hospital sheet lay curled among dusty crates of old medical equipment. It was Emily Harper, a 34-year-old patient from the inpatient ward. No one could fathom how Emily, recorded as stable just hours earlier, ended up in a cold, forgotten closet. Her medical chart indicated she was admitted for acute pneumonia, with no signs foreshadowing such an unnatural death. Even more chilling, there were no witnesses, no security cameras in that area, and no one in the hospital reported anything unusual. The Boston Police Department, led by veteran detective James Callahan, a white man with 20 years of experience, arrived swiftly at the scene. Yet the central question loomed: how could a patient vanish from her hospital bed, and who hid her body in the shadows? A sense of unease began to spread. Other patients at St. Mary's whispered among themselves, their wary eyes tracking every passing staff member. If this could happen to Emily, who's next? One patient's relative asked, voice trembling. The Dorchester community, accustomed to street crime, never imagined that a hospital, the place they entrusted with their lives, could harbor such a horrifying secret. Emily Harper's story was more than a crime. It was a warning about the dark corners lurking behind the pristine white walls of a hospital, where life and death are separated by a fragile line. As Detective Callahan stepped into the storage closet, his flashlight illuminating Emily's pale face, he knew this case would be more than a hunt for a killer. It would expose terrifying truths about the place we all trust most. In the hours that followed, Callahan and his team scoured the scene. One detail sent chills down their spines. The sheet covering Emily's body was neatly folded, as if the perpetrator wanted to show respect or mockery. There were no fingerprints, no obvious bloodstains, but a strange odor hung in the air. Not the usual antiseptic, but something like cheap perfume. Callahan jotted this down, a shiver running through him. This wasn't an accident, he whispered to his colleague. Someone planned this. The story was only beginning. Emily Harper, a single mother and ordinary accountant, now lay silent in the darkness. But her death would unleash a chain of events that would shake Boston to its core. Who did this? And why did they choose to hide her in a place no one would suspect? As the sun set over Dorchester, the shadows of truth began to emerge. The discovery sent shockwaves through St. Mary's. The hospital's sterile hallways, once a symbol of safety, now felt oppressive. Nurses exchanged nervous glances and patients grew restless, some demanding immediate discharge. The local news, including the Boston Globe, descended on the hospital, amplifying the community's fear. Dorchester, a neighborhood familiar with urban struggles, was unaccustomed to such a violation within its trusted institution. Callahan, a seasoned detective with a weathered face and sharp instincts, took charge with methodical precision. He interviewed Maria Gonzalez, who was still shaken. I thought it was a mannequin at first, she said, her voice quivering. Then I saw the red nail polish. I knew it was real. Maria's scream had alerted security, who uncovered Emily's body, her face frozen in a haunting stillness. The bruises on her neck suggested strangulation, but the absence of defensive wounds puzzled Callahan. She didn't fight back, he noted, his mind racing. The storage closet itself offered few clues. Dust-covered crates and outdated equipment filled the space, untouched for months. The lack of cameras in the basement was a glaring oversight, one Callahan flagged immediately. Whoever did this knew exactly where to go, he told his partner, Detective Sarah O'Malley, a sharp-witted officer with a knack for detail. The folded sheet, The absence of blood and the faint perfume scent gnawed at Callahan. He ordered forensic teams to sweep the area, hoping for trace evidence. Outside, the Dorchester community grappled with disbelief. Neighbors gathered in small groups, murmuring about the hospital they'd relied on for generations. "I brought my kids here," one woman told a reporter, her voice breaking. "How could this happen?" The question echoed through the streets, from corner stores to coffee shops. St. Mary's had been a pillar, its 70-year history a source of pride. Now it was a place of dread. Callahan's initial interviews with staff revealed little. Nurses and doctors recounted their routines, but no one had seen Emily after her last check at 1:42 p.m. Her chart showed she was responding well to antibiotics, with discharge planned in a few days. She was fine. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, her attending physician, insisted she was talking about her son. Yet something had gone terribly wrong between that moment and her discovery in the closet. As night fell, Callahan stood in the dimly lit basement, his flashlight sweeping over the scene. The faint perfume scent lingered, a clue that felt both trivial and significant. He recalled a nurse mentioning a staff member who wore a distinctive cologne, possibly a lead. "We're missing something," he told O'Malley, his voice low. This wasn't random. Someone knew her, knew the hospital, and knew how to avoid being seen. Emily Harper's death was a fracture in the community's trust. A single mother who loved her son Ethan, she was no one's enemy. Yet someone had taken her life and hidden her in a place meant to be forgotten. As Callahan left the hospital, the city lights of Boston flickered against the night sky. He knew this case would test him. Not just as a detective, but as a man confronting the fragility of the systems we rely on. The truth, whatever it was, would come at a cost. The Dorchester neighborhood of Boston, home to St. Mary's Hospital, was a quintessential slice of American urban life. Its streets buzzed with corner stores, small coffee shops, and weathered red brick homes nestled alongside modern apartment complexes. This was a community of working-class people, office workers, construction laborers, and families, crowded together yet bound by a sense of resilience. St. Mary's, with its 70-year legacy, stood as a cornerstone for Dorchester's residents, a place to turn to when illness struck. But in June 2025, no one could have predicted that this haven would become the epicenter of a chilling tragedy. Emily Harper, the victim at the heart of the case, was a familiar face in Dorchester. At 34, she was a single mother raising her 8-year-old son Ethan in a modest apartment just blocks from the hospital. As an accountant for a small law firm in downtown Boston, Emily was known for her diligence, punctuality, and a smile that put others at ease. She was the kind of person you'd want as a friend. Sarah, a close colleague, told police. But Sarah shared a detail that caught Detective James Callahan's attention. Emily had seemed unusually stressed lately. She kept checking her watch, like she was waiting for something. "Once, I saw her take a call and look really anxious, but she brushed it off," Sarah said. Emily was admitted to St. Mary's on June 10 for acute pneumonia. Her doctor, Dr. Rachel Nguyen, noted that her condition was stable, requiring only antibiotics and a few days of observation. To the nurses, Emily was a pleasant patient, often asking about her son and sharing lighthearted stories about Ethan's love for baseball. Yet one nurse, Linda Carter, who worked the night shift before Emily vanished, recalled an odd moment. She asked if anyone had come into her room at night, Linda told Callahan. "I thought she was just nervous from the medication, so I reassured her everything was fine." Linda had no idea that question might have been a clue. St. Mary's, despite its reputation, wasn't without flaws. Staff often grumbled about grueling shift schedules and a lack of transparency in management. Whispers circulated among nurses about shadows in the system. Medical supplies occasionally went missing, patient records were altered without explanation, and certain staff seemed overly close-knit. One name came up repeatedly: Marcus Reed, a 42-year-old black hospital orderly with over a decade at St. Mary's. Tall and broad-shouldered with a deep voice, Marcus was generally well-liked for his easygoing nature, but some colleagues noted he'd grown more reserved recently, often lingering at the hospital after hours. Marcus lived alone in a small apartment in Roxbury, a short drive from Dorchester. Neighbors described him as quiet, offering little more than polite nods. One neighbor, Clara, told police she'd seen Marcus bringing large bags home at night but assumed he was working late shifts. "I didn't think much of it," she said. Callahan's interest peaked when he learned of an internal hospital report Marcus had once been investigated for suspected theft of pharmaceuticals from the hospital's pharmacy, though no evidence led to his dismissal. Emily's family offered another perspective. Her mother, Margaret Harper, who lived in suburban Boston, said Emily had been worried about money lately. She was saving to move to a better neighborhood for Ethan, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. She didn't want him growing up in a rough area. But Margaret revealed something else that made police take notice. Emily had mentioned feeling uneasy about a man at the hospital. She didn't give a name, just said someone made her feel unsafe, Margaret recalled. The atmosphere at St. Mary's before the crime seemed ordinary, but subtle cracks had begun to show. A security guard reported that the basement camera system where the storage closet was located had been offline for hours the night before Emily's body was found. Hospital management called it a technical glitch, but Callahan wasn't convinced. He also noted the cheap perfume scent in the closet, which a nurse linked to Marcus Reed, who often wore it. Dorchester, though, hardened by urban challenges, was rocked by the news of Emily's death. Neighbors began questioning how a patient could vanish from a hospital bed unnoticed. "Why didn't anyone see anything?" one resident asked a reporter. The hospital staff, once trusted, now faced suspicious glances from patients and their families. As Callahan started interviewing employees, he sensed the tension in the air. Colleagues eyed each other warily, as if sensing that the truth, whatever it was, would upend everything. Emily Harper, with her warm smile and devotion to her son, was now just a name in a police file. But her story, and what happened in her final hours at St. Mary's, demanded answers. Callahan, flipping through his notebook filled with scribbled leads, knew this case would be tough. The first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the full picture remained elusive. The hospital's inner workings offered more questions than answers. Staff whispered about missing drugs, unreported incidents, and a culture of silence to protect the institution's reputation. Callahan's interviews revealed that Marcus had volunteered for extra shifts, including the night of June 10, which wasn't part of his regular schedule. Why would he need to stay so late? Callahan wondered aloud to O'Malley. The perfume, the camera outage, and Marcus's history of suspicion painted a troubling picture. But Callahan needed more than circumstantial clues. In Dorchester, the community's shock turned to anger. Candlelight vigils for Emily sprang up outside St. Mary's, but so did murmurs of distrust. "I've known Marcus for years," one neighbor said. "He's quiet, but this, I don't believe it." Others weren't so sure, feeding into a growing unease that threatened to fracture the neighborhood's fragile unity. Callahan, aware of the racial dynamics at play with the black suspect, urged his team to focus on evidence, not assumption. As the investigation deepened, the hospital's pristine facade began to crack. Emily's life, once defined by her love for Ethan and her quiet determination, now hung in the balance of a case that would expose the hidden flaws of a trusted institution. Callahan closed his notebook, the weight of the case settling in. The truth, he knew, was buried somewhere in the shadows of St. Mary's, waiting to be uncovered. On June 11th, 2025, St. Mary's Hospital in Dorchester, Boston, hummed with its usual rhythm, but the final moments of Emily Harper's life unfolded in a chilling silence. At 1:42 p.m., her medical chart recorded the last check by Nurse Linda Carter. Emily lay in her bed in room 304 of the inpatient ward, tired but stable. Linda later recalled to Detective James Callahan that Emily managed a weak smile, asking about her son, Ethan. She said, "I just want to go home to my boy," Linda recounted, her voice breaking. "That was the last time I saw her awake." By 2:16 p.m., another nurse, Jessica Brown, entered room 304 to change Emily's IV drip. The bed was empty. The blanket was neatly folded, as if Emily had simply stood up and left. Jessica assumed Emily might have been moved to another room or taken for tests, but no notes in the chart confirmed this. She alerted the head nurse, Helen Myers, who checked the system and found no record of a transfer. "Maybe she's just stretching her legs," Helen told Jessica, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. A patient with acute pneumonia shouldn't be wandering alone. For the next 2 hours, Emily's absence went unnoticed. St. Mary's was in the midst of a hectic afternoon shift, with doctors and nurses scrambling to handle a multi-car accident in the ER. The inpatient ward's hallways grew quiet. save for the soft hum of air conditioning. Security footage from the main corridor captured a tall man in an orderly's uniform pushing an empty wheelchair at 2:30 p.m. The angle obscured his face, but his height and gait later led Callahan to suspect Marcus Reed, the hospital orderly. At 4:05 p.m., a janitor named Carlos Mendez noticed the storage closet door in the basement slightly ajar. A recent hire, only 3 months into his job, Carlos assumed someone forgot to lock it. He closed the door without a second thought. "I didn't smell anything odd," he later told police. "Just the usual, antiseptic." But that closet, tucked in a forgotten corner of the basement, would soon reveal its grim secret. By 6:22 p.m., as the afternoon shift wound down, Helen Myers grew worried. She called Dr. Rachel Wynn, who confirmed Emily wasn't cleared to leave her room without supervision. Helen scoured the inpatient ward, questioning nurses and security, but no one had seen Emily. A brief internal search was launched, but no one thought to check the basement, a space rarely used except for storing outdated equipment. Next morning, June 12th, at 3:47 p.m., Maria Gonzalez, another janitor, opened the storage closet to grab extra cleaning supplies. Under the dim flicker of a fluorescent bulb, she spotted a pile of hospital linens in the corner. A hand protruded from beneath the fabric. Maria screamed, dropping her bucket, and bolted to call security. "I thought it was a mannequin," she told police, her voice trembling. "Then I saw red nail polish. I knew it was real." Security pulled back the sheet, revealing Emily Harper's body. She lay curled up, eyes closed, her face pale as wax. Bruises around her neck pointed to strangulation, yet there were no clear signs of a struggle. A faint scent of cheap perfume lingered, cutting through the basement's musty air. The sheet covering Emily was meticulously folded, as if the killer wanted to tidy their crime. No blood, no weapon, just an eerie stillness. The Boston police, led by Detective James Callahan, arrived within 20 minutes. Callahan, a white man with salt and pepper hair and a seasoned gaze, knew immediately this was no accident. "Someone brought her down here and knew this spot was off the radar," he told Detective Sarah O'Malley, his partner. The perfume scent stuck with him, a peculiar detail. He ordered the forensic team to seal the area and collect evidence. As forensics worked, St. Mary's atmosphere turned suffocating. Nurses whispered nervously, casting suspicious glances at colleagues. Patients in nearby rooms grew frantic, some demanding to leave. "I don't feel safe here anymore," one told a Boston Globe reporter who had arrived as news broke. Dorchester, hardened by street violence, was blindsided by a crime within its trusted hospital. Callahan stood in the closet, his flashlight sweeping over dusty crates. He spotted a faint shoe print on the floor, large, likely a man's. "Check every staff member on yesterday's afternoon shift," he instructed O'Malley. The empty wheelchair from the security footage gnawed at him. Who pushed it? Why was Emily, a patient under care, now lying dead in a basement? Forensics confirmed the time of death between 2:30 and 3:00 p.m. on June 11th, shortly after her disappearance. The absence of defensive wounds suggested she may have been incapacitated. Callahan's mind raced. Was she drugged? The folded sheet and lack of mess hinted at a calculated act, not a crime of passion. The perfume scent, though subtle, felt like a breadcrumb. "We're dealing with someone who knew the hospital's blind spots," he murmured. The community reeled as news spread. Dorchester's residents, from shopkeepers to school teachers, gathered in disbelief. How does a patient just vanish, one neighbor asked. The hospital, a place of healing, now felt like a house of secrets. Social media buzzed with speculation, some pointing fingers at staff, others at the hospital's management for lax security. The camera outage in the basement, dismissed as a glitch, raised red flags for Callahan. As evening fell, Callahan reviewed his notes. The shoe print, the perfume, the wheelchair, all pointed to a deliberate plan. Emily's final words to Linda about wanting to go home to Ethan echoed in his mind. This wasn't just a murder, it was a betrayal of trust. The hospital's sterile halls, once a symbol of hope, now hid a darkness that chilled even a veteran like Callahan. The crime's brutality shook Dorchester to its core. Emily, a devoted mother, was gone, her body hidden where no one would look. Callahan knew the answers lay within St. Mary's, among the staff and systems that had failed her. As Boston's skyline dimmed, the case's weight settled over him. Someone had planned this, and they were still out there, hiding behind the hospital's white walls. By the afternoon of June 12, 2025, St. Mary's Hospital in Dorchester, Boston, was shrouded in tension. The discovery of Emily Harper's body in a basement storage closet had sent shockwaves through the staff, patients, and the tight-knit community. Detective James Callahan, his sharp eyes scanning the scene and his notebook brimming with leads, stood at the heart of the investigation, piecing together fragments of a chilling puzzle. But it was a small, unexpected detail from a reluctant witness that shifted the entire trajectory of the case. Linda Carter, the nurse who had checked on Emily during her final recorded moments, became the first to draw Callahan's attention. A white woman in her early 40s with blonde hair tied back in a tight bun, Linda had been at St. Mary's for over 15 years, known for her dedication. But on this day, she seemed rattled. When Callahan called her into a small hospital meeting room for questioning, her hands fidgeted, twisting nervously, and her eyes darted away from his gaze. "I don't know much," she said, her voice shaky. "I checked on Emily at 1:42 p.m. like the chart says. She was fine, talking about her son." Callahan, with 2 decades of experience reading people, sensed Linda was holding back. He leaned forward, his tone calm but probing. "Did you see anyone else near room 304? Anything out of the ordinary?" Linda hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh, as if unburdening herself. "There was something, but I'm not sure it matters. The night before, around 11 p.m., I saw Marcus Reed, the orderly, pushing a wheelchair in the inpatient ward hallway. I thought he was just working, but the chair was empty, and he looked at me like he didn't want to be seen." The detail hit Callahan like a jolt. Marcus Reed, the tall black orderly with over a decade at St. Mary's, was already on his radar. The security footage of an empty wheelchair being pushed at 2:30 p.m. on June 11 matched Linda's account. But it was her demeanor that intrigued him most. "Why didn't you report this right away?" Callahan asked, his voice steady but pointed. Linda looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to stir trouble. Marcus seems like a good guy, or so I thought. And here, if you say something wrong, you could lose your job. The hospital hates scandals." Linda's reluctance spoke to a deeper issue at St. Mary's, a culture of silence to protect its reputation. Callahan noted her statement but knew she wasn't the only key. Another witness emerged, Robert Delaney, a 62-year-old patient in room 336 near Emily's. A retired truck driver recovering from heart surgery, Delaney spoke to Detective Sarah O'Malley, Callahan's partner. "Around 2 p.m. on the 11th, I heard something," he said, his voice gravelly. "Wheels rolling, like a wheelchair or cart, then a soft click, like a door closing. I figured it was a nurse, so I didn't think much of it, but now it feels off." Callahan and O'Malley began connecting the dots. The wheelchair, the noise, and Marcus Reed's presence in the inpatient ward pointed to a grim possibility. Emily may have been moved from her room in a wheelchair, possibly while weakened or sedated. The forensic team's report added weight to this theory, revealing traces of midazolam, a sedative not prescribed to Emily, in her bloodstream. "Someone knocked her out," the lead forensic analyst told Callahan. He immediately ordered a check of the hospital's pharmacy, only to find several vials of midazolam unaccounted for in the past month. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed continued his shifts at St. Mary's, seemingly unfazed. Callahan observed him from a distance as he wheeled another patient through a hallway. Marcus appeared calm, but his eyes flicked toward the police with a guarded alertness. Callahan held off on confronting him, opting instead to dig deeper into security footage and shift logs. A startling find emerged. Marcus had volunteered for an extra night shift on June 10, unusual for his regular schedule. "Why did he need to be here so late?" Callahan muttered to O'Malley. Dorchester's community was unraveling. News of the murder dominated local headlines, from the Boston Globe to TV stations. Vigils for Emily dotted the hospital's front lawn, but whispers about Marcus Reed grew louder. "I'm not surprised if it's him," one neighbor told a reporter. "He's always so quiet, like he's hiding something." The racial undertones worried Callahan. A case involving a black suspect could inflame tensions in a community already on edge. He urged his team to stick to facts, not rumors. The real turning point came that evening, June 12th, when forensics uncovered a single black hair on the sheet covering Emily's body. Initial tests suggested it wasn't hers, likely belonging to a man. Callahan ordered a DNA sample from Marcus Reed, but cautioned O'Malley, "A hair alone won't convict him. We need more." Still, combined with Linda's and Delaney's accounts, it cemented Marcus as a prime suspect. As night fell, Callahan sat in a temporary office at the hospital staring at a photo of Emily's body. The cheap perfume, the large shoe print, the empty wheelchair, all circled back to one question. Was Marcus Reed the killer? Or just a piece of a larger, murkier puzzle? Linda Carter's hesitant testimony had opened the first door, but the truth remained buried in St. Mary's shadows. The hospital's once comforting halls now felt like a maze of secrets. Staff avoided eye contact, and patients whispered about leaving. The community demanded answers, but fear kept many silent. Callahan knew the culture of cover-ups at St. Mary's. Missing drugs, altered records, ignored complaints had enabled this crime. He flipped through his notebook, circling Marcus's name. The extra shift, the perfume, the wheelchair. They all pointed to him, but Callahan's gut told him the story wasn't complete. Outside, Dorchester's streets buzzed with unease. Candlelit gatherings for Emily contrasted with angry protests outside the hospital. How could they let this happen? One resident demanded. The case was no longer just a murder. It was a betrayal of trust in a place meant to heal. Callahan felt the weight of it all. The grieving family, the fractured community, the hidden truth. As he left the hospital, Boston's skyline loomed under a darkening sky, and he knew the hardest part of the case was still ahead. On December 20, 2025, 6 months after the shocking murder of Emily Harper, the courtroom at Suffolk Superior Court in downtown Boston was packed. Reporters from the Boston Globe, WBZ-TV, and even CNN crowded the back rows, cameras flashing relentlessly. The trial of Marcus Reed and Jamal Carter, the two suspects in the St. Mary's Hospital murder, had gripped not just Dorchester, but the entire nation. Detective James Callahan, dressed in a worn Navy suit, sat in the front row, his calm demeanor masking a heavy heart. He knew that justice, even when served, could never erase the pain Emily's death had caused. The trial, spanning 3 grueling months, saw prosecutors present a damning case. Marcus Reed's fingerprints on the midazolam vial, his hair on the sheet covering Emily's body, and Jamal Carter's confession painted a clear picture. Marcus, a veteran orderly, orchestrated a drug theft ring at St. Mary's. Emily, with her accountant's keen eye, had stumbled upon discrepancies in the pharmacy records during an internal audit. Her threat to report the theft sealed her fate. Marcus, the mastermind, enlisted Jamal, a security guard, with promises of a cut of the profits. But Jamal's panicked act of strangling Emily when she resisted was the fatal misstep. In the courtroom, Marcus maintained an icy composure, rarely meeting the jury's gaze. Jamal, by contrast, was visibly broken, often bowing his head and weeping as prosecutors read his confession aloud. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said on the stand, his voice trembling. "I just wanted her to stay quiet." The jury, a diverse group of 12 Bostonians, remained unmoved. After 4 days of deliberation, they delivered their verdict. Marcus Reed was sentenced to life without parole for first-degree murder and drug trafficking. Jamal Carter received 25 years for manslaughter and conspiracy. Emily's family, particularly her mother Margaret Harper and her son Ethan, sat silently as the verdict was read. 8-year-old Ethan clung to his grandmother's hand, his eyes vacant. "She just wanted a better life for him," Margaret told Callahan after the trial, tears streaming down her face. Callahan, typically reserved, nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder. He knew no sentence could fill the void left by Emily's death. The case didn't end with the verdict. It sent shockwaves through Dorchester and Boston's healthcare system. St. Mary's, once a symbol of hope, was now dubbed the Hospital of Shadows. The administration faced fierce criticism for concealing internal issues, from lax pharmacy oversight to ignoring reports of suspicious behavior. A federal investigation, led by the FBI and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, uncovered systemic failures at the hospital. 3 senior managers were fired, and St. Mary's was forced to spend millions upgrading security cameras and drug inventory protocols. Dorchester itself was divided. Some residents held prayer vigils for Emily, while others protested outside the hospital demanding its closure. Racial tensions flared as some media outlets framed the crime as tied to Roxbury's criminal culture, where Marcus and Jamal lived. Callahan, in a rare interview with the Boston Globe, pushed back. "This isn't about race, it's about greed and a broken system. Anyone can be a victim or a perpetrator under the right circumstances. His words aimed to quell the growing divide, but the community remained on edge. The case's ripple effects extended far beyond Boston. A proposed bill dubbed the Emily Harper Act was introduced in the Massachusetts State House, mandating hospitals to publicly report security and drug management practices. Though still under debate, it sparked a national conversation about safety in medical facilities. Shows like Dateline NBC and 20/20 aired specials titled Death in the Dark and Secrets of St. Mary's, turning Emily, a quiet single mother, into a symbol of the fragility of trusted institutions. Callahan felt the case's weight long after the trial. Back in his small office at the Boston Police Department, he opened his notebook, its pages filled with details of the investigation. He lingered on a photo Margaret had given him, Emily, smiling, hugging Ethan in a Dorchester park. Justice has been served, he told himself, but the words felt hollow. Ethan and Margaret's pain would linger, untouched by the courtroom's outcome. Closing the notebook, Callahan gazed out his window at Boston's twinkling lights, the city's pulse, a stark contrast to his heavy thoughts. The investigation had exposed more than a murder. It revealed a hospital riddled with flaws, unreported thefts, ignored complaints, and a culture of silence. The midazolam thefts, the disabled cameras, the unchecked shifts, all had enabled Marcus and Jamal's scheme. Callahan's team uncovered that the drug ring had operated for months, with Marcus siphoning off sedatives and painkillers to sell on the black market. Emily's discovery of the discrepancies, innocent but dangerous, had made her a target. The community's response was complex. Vigils honored Emily's memory, with candles flicking outside St. Mary's, but protests grew louder with signs reading, "Shut it down" and "Justice for Emily." The hospital's reputation was in tatters and patient numbers dropped as trust eroded. Some staff quit, unable to bear the scrutiny, while others, like Linda Carter, grappled with guilt for staying silent too long. Callahan reflected on the broader implications. Hospitals were meant to be sanctuaries, yet St. Mary's had hidden a darkness that cost Emily her life. The case forced him to question the systems we take for granted: hospitals, schools, workplaces, where trust can blind us to danger. He thought of Ethan, now facing a future without his mother, and the weight of that reality settled in his chest. As Boston moved forward, the scars remained. The Emily Harper Act, if passed, would ensure tighter oversight, but no law could undo the tragedy. Media coverage kept the story alive, with headlines probing the hospital's failures and the human cost of greed. Callahan avoided the spotlight, preferring his quiet office to the clamor of TV cameras. But he couldn't escape the case's impact. It had changed Dorchester, St. Mary's, and even him. The truth had been uncovered, but at a cost. Emily Harper's death was a stark reminder that danger doesn't always lurk in dark alleys. It can hide in plain sight behind the sterile walls of a hospital. As moonlight bathed Dorchester, the shadows of St. Mary's lingered, a haunting warning that even the safest places can conceal the darkest secrets. Thank you for joining Echoes of the Crime on this journey into the darkest corners of the human experience. If you're interested in real cases, justice, and the truths still hidden, don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of the Crime so you won't miss the next story. Because in the world of crime, silence often hides the loudest screams.